Welcome to the Whole Child Sleep podcast, where we help families nurture dreams and raise wholeness. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whole Child Sleep podcast. I am so lucky and grateful to have my mentor as a general sleep coach here, Kim West, who is a world-renowned sleep coach. And she is here to tell us more about the incredible method that she developed, the Sleep Lady Shuffle. So we wanted to address some misconceptions that have been out there about the Sleep Lady Shuffle. We're going to dive in. Kim, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mara. I think it's an important topic. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
So could you tell us, firstly, a little bit about how and why you developed the Sleep Lady Shuffle?
So I had been a family therapist for 31 years. And when I had my first daughter 29 years ago, the only thing that we had, because imagine, no Google, still went to the library and bookstore. I know that makes me sound like a dinosaur, but it just shows you how quickly our world has changed with the internet and Google. At the time, the only thing that was really available to us was what they called Ferberizing your baby. In other parts of the world, they call it controlled crying. But in the science field, it's called graduated extinction, which means put the baby into the bed, awake and aware that they're being put in there, and then leave the room. And then you could go in and check on them, and what you do on the checks depends, with the idea that the longer, you wait longer and longer before you go in, with the idea that the child will learn to put themselves to sleep, no matter how dysregulated a state they're in. And, let's just put aside what age, because that was not clear when I was a young mom, what age you should or could do that in, and which a child was ready. And so me as a therapist, I thought, I don't know if that makes sense to me in terms of, as a therapist, I know the importance of developing a secure attachment with my child. And I thought I didn't see how that was teaching them, in that early stages of life where we're working on trust, that they could trust me to respond to them and to be there for them, number one. And number two, I didn't really understand how they were going to learn when in such a dysregulated state. And I remember even in my internship, we have to do 2 years of internships. One of the popular ways to handle a child's temper tantrum is timeout. So you walk away from them, number one, in a temper tantrum. And then at some point, or maybe even right away, you kind of put them on a chair or put them in some other way. And again, walk away from them, sort of saying, like, go figure out your big feelings all by yourself. And I also didn't think that made a lot of sense because, look, a lot of us adults don't have the self-regulation thing down. When we're angry or cranky or tired or whatever, to get us into a, calmer, more balanced state. And so that's when I started to think, well, maybe could there be another way? I understood the concept of, if I hold you to sleep and then you wake up in another place, that might be startling. And so I basically experimented with my older daughter, who turned out lovely. I always say she's the cutest guinea pig I know. And frankly, our first, they're all kind of guinea pigs for all of us, right? We're learning how to do it. And then I thought, well, I'm going to stay with her. I did wait until she was a little bit older, by the way. And I did other things before then, what I now call baby-led sleep shaping. And I stayed with her and offered her physical, verbal reassurance. And I experimented and tried to get to know her and what she responded well to. And then I just did less and less and was able to move away. So I, in a sense, never really actually had to sleep train. I call it sleep coaching because I think it is more coaching from the parent with the child than it is, training them. And it worked. And I felt pretty good about it. She seemed to too. And then I started helping, my friends, and friends of friends. And it kind of just blew up from there. And I started coaching families, like develop a plan and coach them through the process. And I did that for probably a year, for free to, hone my method and apply it to naps and different age groups, children. And then, when I ended up 10 years later writing a book, the publisher called it The Shuffle, the Sleep Lady Shuffle. So a little bit about why I did that.
The Sleep Lady Shuffle gets confused with different methods, or some people have taken the Sleep Lady Shuffle and made it something that is not what you intended it to be. Some of the words that are used for the Sleep Lady Shuffle that I've heard, and you can help me parse it out, is the chair method and camp out method, and then of course general sleep training. Will you have us parse that out and understand which is which?
Yeah. So, and part of what's made this more confusing for parents is that there are now many sleep coaching certifications or sleep trainer certification programs since I started mine 13 years ago. And so that's when I sort of lost control over how I teach my method because other people are teaching it. I gather from reading my book. So just a little clarity for families. I think it's really helpful to know that there's basically three ways. There's really two, but let's just say three ways to sleep train. So full extinction, which is, put the baby in the crib, leave the room, don't go in all night, right? That's more made popular by Dr. Weisblatt. And then the middle one is graduated extinction, which I mentioned earlier, which is, put the baby in the crib, leave the room, and, you can go back and check on them, and then it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. What you do in the checks is what people vary, right? Like some people say pick up, some people say don't pick up, some people say touch, talk, don't, So there's a lot of it. This is where you see a lot of variations here. And I think creates confusion. And then the third approach is behavioral science. They call it fading, but I think that gets a little confusing for parents. So with fading. So I like to just call it parental fading. So the parent stays, by the way, graduate extension is Ferber in about 98% of books out there are on graduated extinction. And then parental fading is where you stay with the baby or child and do less and less, and in some cases move away as the child incorporates the skill. So I would consider pick up, put down is a form of parental fading, the no cry sleep solution, and the Sleep Lady Shuffle. And so over the years, so my first book has been out 20 years now. And, they call it SLS or the Shuffle. And then they started calling it, pediatricians or the sleep science world started calling it, or the sleep medicine world, started calling it camping out, when really I see why they could say that, right? Because you're sitting in the room, but camping out is really extinction because you're sitting in there and right next to the child's crib, and you are not, or bed, and not responding at all, not with eye contact, not verbally, and not with touch. This to me is extremely disturbing from a family therapist point of view. I honestly wonder if it would be just better to leave. Because if you listeners have ever heard of the still face research where they did this with babies and toddlers and the mom, and the child becomes very distressed when the parent stops engaging with them and has literally a still face. And it's similar to when a parent is depressed, right? And that affects attachment. So remember why I originally started this, right? To only find that people are teaching the shuffle to do this and potentially harming an attachment. So camping out is that. Also, they're teaching the chair method as that too. I'd rather, if someone doesn't want to use the shuffle name and you want to call it the chair method, then at least let's do the chair method appropriately and offer that physical and verbal reassurance that our child needs and pick up to calm down when they become too dysregulated. The idea is you're saying, I'm here for you. I love you. I'm helping you with this. Because after all, either A, you're too young to do this on your own, or B, I taught you that the way you go to sleep is to be held to sleep. And now I want to stop that. And so they don't understand that. And so it makes sense that we would be there to offer that reassurance. I mean, I'm a big proponent of responsive parenting. That doesn't mean parenting without boundaries or frameworks of your day and night, but responsive, because it's all about what you do in the response.
Parents may feel that if they respond, the crying gets worse. What are your thoughts on that, Kim?
I mean, I like to use this metaphor with parents. So if your child, and you probably heard this in the training, your child is, you're making dinner, let's say, and your 2-year-old is saying, I want a cookie, I want a cookie. And you say, no, sweetie, no cookies before dinner. And they have a full-blown tantrum, right? They keep escalating. And then they have a full-blown temper tantrum. I'm a proponent of hug hold, right? Where once they have a little lull in the calm, bring them to a quiet place, sit them on your lap, facing outward, hold them tightly, do some deep breathing, which by the way calms us down too, and also calms down our child. And if they're verbal enough, afterwards you could have a chat about, wow, I see you got really upset when mommy said there's no cookies before dinner. But that's our rule. And so we don't have cookies before dinner. And then you could talk about what are other things you could do with your big feelings, right? And so what we're saying is I'm acknowledging your feeling. I'm also teaching about other ways, which we didn't get into, that you can express your big feelings, but I'm not giving you the cookie, right, before dinner. And so I don't, I think that some of the parents who, or other experts say, oh, well, you're giving in to them. And then, they'll always think that that's what they can get. This is a great example of, I didn't give you a cookie, but I'm helping you as you process your big feelings, because they are big feelings to them. We might not have a temper tantrum over not getting a cookie before dinner as adults, but we've had to learn, hopefully, in our life, how to process our feelings when somebody says no. So to me, and in the same, if you think about that in sleep coaching, it's all about how you respond, right? So you respond to your child's distress and crying, and then you're assessing what's really going on. Why are they crying? Is there another way I can help them? And you respond appropriately. And that dyad creates a relationship, an attachment, and bonding. Are we perfect in parents? Do we get it wrong? Yeah, we do, but it's okay. That's those, it's in those reattachments and those repairs that we're also strengthening our attachment.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Kim. And so that leads us to the topic we were going to talk about next, which was the misconception that the sleep lady shuffle is cry it out. And I feel like what we just spoke about just now is evident to that not being the case.
Well, for sure, it's cry it out with them in the room if you're actually doing nothing, right? As a parent, no responding. That would be right, because that's what we talked about before, camping out, and is really actually considered extinction, And I think there's a big difference between I'm confused, why aren't you holding me to sleep anymore? To you don't love me, you've abandoned me, because you're right there, you haven't. And instead you are supporting them through, let's just continue to use those words, those big feelings. And I'm a big proponent of pick up to calm down. There are children, and it's depending on their temperament, who can go from 0 to 100 and get to the point where they don't even know why they're crying anymore. And those babies and children need to be held, picked up, calm down, until they can settle enough, kiss, reassure, put back down and put into their bed. And so, I don't think it is cried. It doesn't mean that your child won't cry, right? Because after all, you've changed the pattern for them and they don't understand why. I mean, one of the reasons why I actually like to work with the older kids is because you can have this dialogue with them. Plus I think they crack me up the things they say, or even like your daughter, okay, mom, I got it. You can leave. That's like a dream. I remember when the first time my older daughter could tell me her ear hurt, right? How we don't know, and she ended up having an ear infection. I thought all those times when she was a baby, I wish I had known what was really going on. So I don't feel like it is. And I feel like we can have, when our kids are older, we can have a dialogue about it too. And we can say, I know, that I taught you how, mommy and daddy, your parents taught you how to go to sleep by laying down with you and rubbing your back. But now, right, we're going to, we learned that we should have taught you another way. And we're going to stay with you and support you while you learn this skill. And so that's what we get to say to our verbal kids. But in a sense, that's the same messaging we're going to be feeling and saying and acting on with our babies. I think it's important to know, you have a listener who's listening to this and saying, oh no, I did Ferber, or I did controlled crying or cry it out. And it worked. Did I damage the attachment with my child? And I always say to, if it worked and it didn't take you 3 weeks, please don't lose sleep over this, pun intended. I just want parents to know that, one thing doesn't work for everybody, right? And you have to pick what's the right match for your temperament, your child's temperament, and your parenting philosophy, and what you can follow through with consistently. And I just feel like so many parents can't do cry it out, ends up making them more inconsistent, which can make the problem worse. And so I think it's always easier, frankly, to start gently. If things are going really well, you can always move faster. So please don't feel guilty if it worked for you. And, there are the stories of, in 3 nights, my child was sleeping through the night. And so that's important for parents to know, but I think they should have choices.
Parents, when they're looking for sleep solutions, they may choose a method assuming that it's going to give them immediate results. Could you tell me a little bit about the intention behind the gradual approach?
Interesting study that came out that studied, they were trying to prove that gentle sleep coaching is effective, not more effective than graduated extinction, just effective. And they found that it was, and that it could take a little longer, but it was less stressful to the parent and child. And so that's great news, right? If that it works, in other words. So I would say, the infamous extinction promise is 3 nights, which I think could happen, right? With extinction and graduated extinction. I don't know when they say 3 nights what that actually means. Like, is your 8-month-old suddenly sleeping 11 hours throughout the night? And how does that apply to naps? Again, this is the problem with these blanket statements. So I usually tell parents this: on average, 7 to 10 nights, the bedtime is much easier and faster, and they're largely sleeping through the night, maybe a little early rising, that 4 or 5 a.m. Rising, then the morning nap falls into place, and then the afternoon nap and early rising are like 2 to 3 weeks, just because they are linked together, as you know, Myra. But for your listeners, they're linked together, and they're the harder times to put yourself either to sleep or back to sleep. So it's kind of like the easiest times to learn to go to sleep are bedtime. And so therefore that makes sense that that would be the first skill you would nail it. Right. And then I always like to think of it like the curing of cement, right? It gets, it's like hard on the top, but not underneath. And then maybe after 3 weeks, then the whole cement is cured, and we have the skill then.
Are there any other thoughts that you want to share before we wrap this up? Anything you feel like would be important for parents to know?
I think that a lot of the advice out there is just sort of blanket, right? Everybody should want this one thing, which is the graduated extinction for all children in all circumstances. So babies who were not adopted at birth, who you as a parent have adopted and your first primary goal is developing an attachment and a bond. I would say, as a therapist, work on that first. And of course, if there are any other things that have to be addressed, medically or, sensory processing or anything like that, and then doing gentle sleep coaching, not leaving them. And then the other group is any children who are non-neurotypical, have special needs, who already have challenges in self-regulating. Those children really need our support. And 80% of those children have a sleep challenge, as opposed to 30% of neurotypical children. So that's kind of a must in my eyes. And then children in beds, because what happens when we do cry it out or silent return, I've heard, right, is the child goes pitter patter out of the room because they're in bed and they can walk and open doors. And then we're supposed to silently return them to the room. What I find is that could be like 10, 20, 30 times a night. And eventually everybody loses their temper or their patience for sure. And then that often will lead to locking of the door, holding the door shut, which by the way, totally get it. Parenting has its challenging moments. I understand. I really do. I'm an imperfect parent also. And then of course, what happens when you lock your child in there is that now creates, anxiety about going to bed. And so then it escalates every night. And I also fear, I've had kids, I've heard, not under my tutelage, but who've knocked over furniture, pulled down drapes, do things in their room in protest, to being locked in there. So I find the shuffle works like a charm with children in beds. It was a 3-year-old that named me the sleep lady, by the way. And, I really love working with this age. So I am biased about that. And then the other group is these sort of, well, let me say most importantly, are newborns, 0 to 3 month olds. And honestly, frankly, the circadian rhythm only starts to be developed around 4-ish months, and really more like 6 months. And then it goes on for, a while before it's really firmly developed. But it doesn't make any sense to me to sleep train a newborn. They don't even know. First of all, they're in a primitive brain state. They come out, they don't know what anything is, right? What the sounds mean, this new temperature, all of a sudden they have to communicate to be fed, when in utero, they didn't communicate anything, right? It's all through that umbilical cord. So they don't know how to close their eyes, turn away even. They don't even yet in the beginning know how to bring their hands to midline, not to mention get into their mouth to soothe. So when somebody's in their face and it's loud and overwhelming, they don't know how to, even just do the simplest thing. So why in the world would they learn how to quote unquote self-soothe when they're in a completely dysregulated state? Eventually you leave them to be overstimulated at that point. And I don't mean overstimulated by touching, holding. I mean overstimulated by their world and what it all means. So I'm a big proponent of that. And then really you want them to get through that 4-month sleep progression. I feel like sometimes we as parents are told there's going to be some kind of regression every 2 weeks, and it immobilizes us. So I don't mean that, but the 4-month milestone, actually things are changing in their sleep architecture, their sleep cycles. So they do wake up more completely in between. They have a harder time going to sleep. They enter into it from a more wakeful state. So it's helpful to kind of get through that until you see things settle down a little bit more, and then do some I'm more of a proponent of what's called baby-led sleep shaping. You sort of build this foundation. And then when they're developmentally ready, hence the name baby-led, you start adding on some more independence in going to sleep, but in a very calculated way. And always factoring in temperament. I find these alert children, what I call alert children, it's funny because a lot of people say, oh, my child's alert, so therefore I should leave the room. No. Your child's alert, so therefore you should stay in the room. Those are the kids that need the most help in calming down, self-regulating again, and learning those skills. And so I'm kind of biased about those groups that they really need a gentler approach. And also, again, to all, the parents out there, you have nothing to lose by starting off gently. And then and like I said earlier, if things are going well, move faster. I mean, I remember one of my clients who became one of my coaches in my first class 13 years ago. She had worked with Dr. Weisbluth, and they had done full extinction. And it was for 3 weeks with still the child's not sleeping through the night, still waking. And the mom said to him, why isn't this working? I thought this is supposed to work. I mean, I'm not doing anything to reinforce it or anything like that. And he said, I don't know, sometimes it just doesn't work. And didn't offer her an alternative. And so again, and hopefully you don't try something for 3 weeks before you say, why isn't this working? I would say 5 days, 3 to 5 days. You see no improvement, I would stop. First of all, rule out underlying medical conditions, and then, talk to a gentle sleep coach. It might be that you were doing something that was reinforcing the awakenings that you weren't aware of, because it's hard to see the forest, or hard to see the trees through the forest. And then maybe start gentler.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights and helping us understand the method that you've created, how it is customized to maintain healthy connection with your children, and how to do it right. And also, I want you all to know, who are listening, that I will be posting myths about the sleep lady shuffle and debunking myths that have been out there. So I'll be posting those. So stay tuned for that and reach out if you have questions. Thank you for listening to the Whole Child Sleep podcast. For references to articles discussed in this podcast or for evidence on the topics that we've discussed on this podcast, please look in the description below, or you can find the articles linked in our blog at curesleep.us. I want to give you an idea of what you can expect in terms of structure of this podcast moving forward. You can expect one podcast a week, and we will cover a topic for 2 weeks. The first week, you can expect the podcast to be more educational and informational. The following week will be more of a Q&A covering the same topic. If you have a question that you would like us to answer during the Q&A podcast, please send them in at 406-551-4083. And if you've found this podcast to be helpful, we ask that you share it. We would love to reach more tired families. We also ask that you subscribe and like and give us a 5-star review. This also helps us reach more tired families. We hope you have a beautiful day, and we will talk to you next week. By listening to this podcast, you understand and agree to the following. The content of this podcast offers the opinions of Meyer Hartzheim and her guests, and it is not intended as medical advice. It serves as an informational purpose. For personalized and medical concerns, consult your healthcare professional. The views and opinions in this podcast are our own and don't represent our employees or affiliates. The views of the guests in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect that of Care Sleep Group. Our podcast and website are not for legal purposes, such as establishing a standard of care or expert witness testimony. We don't guarantee the accuracy of statements or opinions. We appreciate your assistance in maintaining content accuracy. If you find errors in our podcast or blogs, please reach out via email to support@curesleep.us. This podcast is owned by Cure Sleep LLC and presented by the Whole Child Sleep podcast. Thank you for tuning in.